What's up, Trek Groups? Welcome to week 1 of our No Filter study. Hopefully this last week you've been thinking about who is God. So last week I brought up this idea of you are what you behold. It's just a fancy way of saying you are what you stare at. So quick story. When I was in college, I was sitting in an afternoon class trying to stay awake, and up to the window of the door of the classroom walks this beautiful girl that I've never seen before. And she begins to stare at me. And at first, I'm trying to ignore it, avoid it, because it's kind of awkward. This beautiful girl walks up, she's staring at me. But then, I can't avoid it anymore. She's just staring at me, so I kind of stare at her. And then she begins to give me her number. She's like, and she gives me her number through the window. I'm like, what is going on? So she walks away, and I sit there for a minute, this beautiful girl just walked up, stared at me. I stared at her. She gave me her number. What does this mean? And then I realized that she was actually staring at her boyfriend, who was sitting right behind me. But for a minute there, as she stared at me and I stared at her, it gave me some value. It gave me some worth. It gave me a little bit of identity that this beautiful girl would stare at someone like me. Well, what does that mean about me and who I am? And then what happened when she walked away? There went that value and worth and identity. See, that's the thing about the things that we stare at. We stare at the things we stare at to give us purpose and worth and value and identity. We stare at sports to give us purpose and worth and value and identity. We stare at these things, our cell phones, to give us purpose and worth and value and identity. We stare at relationships, whether it be our best friends or a boyfriend or girlfriend. We stare at them to answer the question of, am I worth it? Do I have value? Who am I? But what if we stared at God? What if we stared at God to answer the question of who am I? So, who is God? I love the story in Revelations 4 where it talks about there's all these angels sitting around the throne, and there's these creatures, and they have eyes all over them. And it says day and night, they never stop saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Who is this God that we're supposed to stare at? Or in Luke 15, the famous story of the prodigal son, it talks about how God is a father who runs after us. Who is this God that we're supposed to stare at? So here in a month, actually a month from today, I will stand before an audience. There's nobody here. But I'll stand before an audience, and I will get to marry one of my former students. So he will stand on my left, she will stand on my right, and I will tell them the same thing that I tell almost everyone that I get to marry. And here's what I tell them. Do not stare at each other to answer the question of who you are. Do not stare at each other to find your value and your purpose and your worth. Because they're humans. They weren't created to answer that question for you. They weren't created to give you value and purpose and worth. It will only go away. It will never last. So what will I tell them? Stare at the cross. Don't stare at each other for who you are, for your identity. Stare at the cross. So I want you to continue to think about, who is this God that can answer the question of who I am? Who is this God that is the only one that holds the answers to the questions of who I am, what I'm worth, what my purpose is, why I have value? Continue to think about who God is and how that impacts how we see ourselves. Love y'all. Hope you have a good week. Talk to you later.